Geopolitics and Empire is joined by lawyer and popular podcaster Legalman. His podcast is called The Quash, and you can find the link in the description below. We'll be talking about what's happening in America today, as well as COVID-19, 1984, and what he thinks about the Great Reset. Welcome to the podcast, Legalman. I think I know how you're doing, but I'll ask anyway. How's it going?
It's going good. Thanks for asking. It's crazy world out there.
All right. I wanted to start by talking about, the joke that is U.S. politics today, and get your thoughts on the post-Trump, what some call the post-American world, Biden, etc. And I thought I'd start with breaking news from Reuters today, which has revealed that the leader of the Proud Boys has a history of working with the FBI as an informant. And then, I don't know if you got to hear that, but, and then we have this whole QAnon phenomenon, which in my analysis seems like it's a government counterintelligence operation. And, myself as a conservative, I would normally superficially side with Trump and some of his conservative agenda, but it seems that Trump hasn't done much. In the words of my past guest, Pastor Chuck Baldwin, he may have been wittingly or unwittingly a globalist Trojan horse, and now he's banned from social media for life, and banks are closing his accounts. On top of that, Biden, I think in his first week, has approved 19 executive orders, which is insane. And so things are just kind of becoming comical, surreal, which in itself, I think, signals some kind of collapse of, the collapse of the American empire or what have you. So, how would you kind of sum up our current situation?
Clown world. I mean, we've just been dropped into an absolutely insane situation. It's, Biden, the guy's 47-year politician, just a joker from a very corrupt state. I mean, Delaware is so corrupt, and that's why they had, for years it had the lock on all the corporation stuff, because it's basically just a way for these people to come in, set stuff up, and kind of hide. But as far as Trump goes, I still think Trump was a puppet, whether or not he was knowing. I don't see how anybody could be as naive as he would have to be in order to not have been involved. Whether he knew everything, whether or not he was somewhat naive and kind of got, the backhand at the end, I don't know. I really don't know. But certainly the gloves are off and the curtain has come down at this point with regards to, or up, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. If it just falls, it's down. If they pull it up, it's up. As to the absolute charade that any kind of governmental politics is, I mean, how can anybody take Joe Biden seriously as a leader? I mean, that's an honest question. How could anybody who's objectively looking at a guy like that accept him as a leader in a serious fashion? He's a dementia patient, child sniffer. I mean, his career is a complete joke. He's not very bright. He's been caught plagiarizing and lying over and over again. His sons, they're jokes. I just honestly don't understand how anybody could take the situation seriously at this point. I just don't.
Yeah, I've seen some things on social media I don't know if you've seen this, but Biden supporters now saying that people who voted for Biden, that they're regretting the decision already. So
it's like 5 minutes after sex. I got an early meeting. I got to get going here. Wow.
And I mean, how bad are things? Do you see any silver lining like on the horizon? Because, there's been this third party registered called the Patriot Party, purportedly by Trump, but then he said he had nothing to do with it. And sometimes I wonder, if we're even going to have elections at all in 2024. I mean,
Oh yeah. They're going to keep having the elections. This very concept that the vote is so important and it's a sacred ballot that Biden talked about in his inauguration speech. That's the heart of the system in the U.S. Now, there's a lot of countries where the people know that the governments are jokes and they just kind of go along because they're either dumber populations that are more beaten down. It's hard to know what the reason is. But in the U.S., the central lever to keep everybody on board is this fantasy about voting and a government of, by, and for the people and the Constitution. That is absolutely essential totally essential. And whether or not they break it and bring in some third-party candidate, who knows? My theory about the Russian thing, the absurd Russian thing that ran on for years and years with Trump, is that the entire thing, really the underlying basis of it, was to have this constant running implication that the vote is this super important thing that has to be protected at all costs. And even though the investigation, of course, was ridiculous, it kept that concept in the minds of the people that we have to make sure the vote, has to be so pristine. And whether it's a third party or not a third party, who knows? And now we're going to have, I'm sure, a whole bunch of people making sure that the vote in 2022 and 2024 is right, and there'll be litigation and new legislation and all sorts of fundraising around this stupid crap. And the people will continue to believe that. Whether Trump's involved in it or not, I don't know. I loved his trolling with the office of the former president. That was pretty funny stuff he put out there. That's very clever.
What are your thoughts on the election fraud? I think we've had election fraud and meddling since time immemorial, and it was interesting because I think back in February, almost a year ago, I interviewed Dr. Robert Epstein, the expert on Google, the manipulation of Google on our elections, and he had basically predicted, like what he said came true, that big tech is going to take over, and Democrats are going to take over, and they're going to just steal millions of votes through their shenanigans. And to me, it seems like clearly that the election was stolen, and they quickly swept everything under the rug.
Well, I don't think I would disagree that I think they've made it pretty clear that the election results, whatever they are, they're not trustworthy. I mean, we all saw Fat Tony with the suitcase of votes when they kicked everybody out, running them through, and then you see the spike in the number. And it's the proof is there. I mean, the fact is, I've made podcasts about the fact that none of the courts are hearing the evidence, and they can't ever hear the evidence. And I knew they would never hear the evidence. And that's what I predicted when the stupid legal stuff started on it, is because they can't hear the evidence. You can never have an error in these facts because the facts are so damning. I think the fraud was so massive. And there's all sorts of additional things anybody can see. I mean, they make sure that nobody appears at Biden's inauguration. Why? Most likely because nobody would have bothered showing up. And so instead they just said, oh, you can't come. It's no different than inviting someone to a party you don't really want to go, when they're not going to be in town. Oh, I'm so sorry you're not going to be there. Oh, I'm so sorry the inauguration's closed. It's the same kind of tactics, and the people fall for it because the people aren't very bright. And I think that the elections have probably always been relatively corrupt, but I just think it went so over the top this time. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. The idea that Joe Biden, people came out more than any time in history to vote for that joker, it's not credible. Anybody can look at simple things like the kind of responses and reactions he gets on social media and tweets and things like that. He doesn't get anybody, nobody listening to him. No one follows him. As you were already saying, tons of people already have buyer's remorse. He wasn't that popular. He never was that popular. And the fact that they can bring someone in was such a transparently fraudulent election, and then to gaslight everybody continuously about how he's so popular and it was so pristine, and the DOJ has gone through it and they found no evidence of fraud. Well, statements like that are hilarious. They found no evidence of fraud. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons that might have been. Maybe they didn't look. That's an explanation where they could still be speaking a perfectly true thing. We found no evidence, right? Because you didn't look. They could just be defining evidence in 1,000 different ways. But anybody who does an objective examination of the sort of facts of what went on with that election, it's impossible to come away with the conclusion that it wasn't massive amounts of fraud in 1,000 different ways. I don't vote. I haven't voted in decades. I don't care who wins a stupid thing. I didn't care about Trump. I don't care about Biden, but I can be objective. And it's a laugher what went on in that election. It's just ridiculous. That's all.
Yeah, I kind of stopped voting as well. The last time I voted was on principle for Ron Paul, but it is what it is. And
right.
I'm wondering, we're hearing a lot of mention of banana republic now in America. And, in the early 2000s, I felt that America was on the road to becoming some type of, Nazi dictatorship, man in the high castle or something, and authoritarian, totalitarian states. Because of the trajectory of how things were going and the decline of the empire, I foresaw kind of like a declining economy, persecution against dissidents, Christians, which we're seeing now, as well as, people on the left, anti-war left, and others, genuine folks on the left. And then I kind of decided simply to expatriate. And it seems that 2021 now is kind of overtly beginning to confirm at least part of my hypothesis that I had years ago. And, we're seeing people on having their social media accounts terminated, people that are banned from using Airbnb, Uber just for their personal views, bank accounts being closed, not just for Trump, but there's individuals, I've heard of other YouTubers and people having their bank accounts closed for their personal political or religious views and whatnot. And so how do you see this kind of trajectory towards some, fascism, totalitarianism, whatever you want to call it in the U.S.?
I look around, I see a lot of the same kind of things you do. And what perplexes me, and the thing I find fascinating, is not so much that they're driving everybody towards it. Of course, the people who run our country are no different than the people who run every other kind of country. They're control freaks. They abuse the population. I tell people a couple things. One, look at what they're doing to Trump. This is assuming that he's not working with them and is perfectly happy to have this happen to him. Okay, this is assuming the narrative that this is being done to him. All right. Here's a guy with 100 million followers or something on social media. He's certainly unbelievably recognizable, at least allegedly a billionaire. All these different things. And look what they can do to him. Imagine what they can do to average people. I try to tell people, look, if they can do that, and it doesn't even matter if they're actually doing it, they're showing people that somebody who's that prominent can be brought down by the system. That doesn't seem to scare people. That still doesn't seem to wake them up to the fact that the noose is tightening. It's just tightening on everybody. What fascinates me is that, as I said earlier, lots of countries, people know that's kind of the rules, right? This is it. It's not a free country. The people don't even imagine it's a free country in a lot of the countries in the world. They know it's a joke. But what amazes me in this country is how so many people keep running around acting like it's a free country, talking like it's a free country, a total and complete disconnect. It would be way easier for me to handle it psychologically if everybody just kind of knew, like me, that the government's a fraud. It's not a free government of, by, and for the people. It's a joke. It's a scam. It's a control system, criminal enterprise. Then it would be easier because people wouldn't run around defending it. But today, the people, despite what we can see, where they just shut people down and close accounts, all the abuse is just laid out. And yet, the reaction from so many people is that we're still the greatest, freest country, and we just need to get the right people. And all this sort of nonsensical sloganeering that they just repeat back. That, to me, is the part that's so amazing, that the brainwashing so deep about the nature of the country with the Constitution and all this stupid crap they've been fed for decades and decades in their head since they were born, that even when they're confronted with such obvious, blatant facts like we can see, and you can read anywhere in the news, anytime you turn on media, you just see that the freedom is a total illusion. And yet the people continue to repeat phrases as though they are free, as though the Constitution does protect them, as though we do have First Amendment rights, as though they mean anything. It's just, I don't, that's the part that's just such a total disconnect for me. Is it really a surprise to a thinking person that a government's trying to abuse the people? No, that's what government does. The amazing part is the way people continue to defend the government. That's the part I just don't get. I just don't get it. I don't have any explanation for it.
I would agree with you, and that's one of the things that gets me as well. That was one of my questions later on, but you touched on it. That I mean, even here in Mexico, for example, we'll talk about COVID in a bit, but like all of this masking and lockdowns, and the government cares for our health, right? Like, let's say here in Mexico. But in Mexico, everybody knows that the government works with the drug cartels, the police. When I first came to Mexico, my home was robbed 3 times before I decided to move. And the police drove by, I think the 3rd time. And the guy, when I told the cop, like, they just, raided my house, the door is broken open. And the guy just like laughing, the cop. And so it's like, the cops are literally kidnapping people. They just came out a week ago that the 43 kids that were killed some years ago, it was with the help with the local authorities. And so we've got police who are literally killing people, and then all of a sudden they care for our health, right? And so my kind of response has been, I'm just battening down the hatches. I'm in survival mode, and I just want to spend more time now just worrying about the way forward, right? Like, I don't know if I'm going to have a job for how much longer. And so I'm just disengaging from the people around me, these zombie lemmings who buy into all of this. And it's just, there's no more time to deal with these kinds of people. It's just like, I got things to do. I got to, batten down the hatches, prepare for whatever's coming. And I just it's like this Borg, I can't deal with them anymore. I don't know how you feel.
This is what I'm saying. And I'm noticing it more and more. We're 10 months into this insanity. And, for me, as of day one, boom, I was blowing up over the idea that they're going to lock businesses down or anything else. I knew that was an impossible bad idea, but the psychological effect is what I'm noticing so much. And, in the country like Mexico, where you're saying that the people all know that this governmental system is a complete joke, and they just go through kind of pantomime of complying and, okay, sure, yeah, that's the rules. They know it's all hypocrisy and made up. But they don't run around claiming they're the freest, greatest government system in the world like the fools do in this country. And that's the part that's just driving me crazy, because this whole thing ultimately is a gigantic psychological operation. That's all this corona thing is all over the world. It's some kind of very elaborate PSYOP, and there's a lot of different levels to it. And obviously the purpose of it is ultimately not psychological, but to lock people down and take stuff and to usher in all these new things they want to do. But in order to do that, it's the flip side of the problem that people like you and I face with the population, which is ultimately, in order for us to win, the only actual chance we have is to win the people over, to convince them, to show them, to inform them. Well, the government and the people on the other side of it have had literally unfettered decades and decades of control, not to mention the men with the guns, in order to brainwash people in the wrong direction. So when you try to explain to people that government is the problem, in this country, in America, it's you just hit a wall, because they're just so convinced it's the greatest, freest system ever devised. And as long as people continue to trust government, believe in government, and think that government could, even ever could, in any form or fashion, have the sort of authority to do these insane things like lock people down or make them wear masks or close businesses or take your money and hand it out to their friends, as long as people believe that exists, that that's a legitimate thing that government can do, well, there's no chance, because every government you set up will immediately start abusing it. The only chance we have is to get people to understand the actual system, which is that government's a criminal enterprise, and it has to be kept, if you're going to have it at all, incredibly small and local, because that's the only way you can watch government. That's the only way you can watch government. And you have to have full liability, personal liability, for all the actions that every governmental employee takes. It doesn't matter if he's following order. It doesn't matter if he's passing an agenda. It doesn't matter what he's doing. They all have to remain personally liable for all their actions. And because all that stuff is gone, and the people live in such an incredible, crazy fantasy world where government is portrayed as this kind of savior that's for the people. And even though the people know that's not true in many countries, in every single country, there are huge numbers of people, always at least 30, 40% of the people that continue to believe in the government and the good of government. I mean, Solzhenitsyn's made it clear with a full third of the people in the camps. When Stalin died, they cried. They believed that if they could just get to Stalin, that they were being imprisoned wrongfully and he would correct it, that they actually believed in this kind of thing. And that's, of course, an extreme case, but that's the same kind of insane disconnect that I'm seeing in the population. And it's the part that makes it so difficult to figure out solutions and what we can actually do, because I detest interacting with the general public for the same reason you do, is that it's mind-bending. It's a waste of my time. They're brain dead. You can't get through to them. And when you have a situation where the population's like that, really, what are the answers for people like you and me who are such a tiny minority? We're really, really in a bad hole. And that's why I try to focus on kind of educating people, because it's our only actual solution. Getting other politicians and other things like that, that's never going to work. You can never use the system to fix the system. That makes no sense. And the system is never going to correct itself. That, again, makes no sense. So every solution has to be that people need to have a new, better, clearer understanding of what the system actually is. That's the only actual chance we have.
Yeah, and I had the same epiphany that, eventually there's only so much you can do on your own to protect yourself, but you need a critical mass of people. And, if it's like, this is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. There's this book called They Thought They Were Free, where this academic interviewed 10 average Germans. And everything he says in that book, we're living it right now. People that are just going along, and then we're going to end up in this, dystopian technocratic dictatorship. And what's that going to help if everyone's going along and I'm not, and maybe I'm preparing, maybe I buy like a farm or something, but eventually they're gonna send Gestapo out and take me away. There's no way
there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, we need to work to push
back. You can buy time. I hear this all the time from people too, and I joke about the fact that I get sick of people. Oh, it's a solution. Where are your solutions? All you have is problem. I'm sorry that the solutions are very difficult to pull off, but all of the other things that people call solutions, they're not solutions. Lawsuits, they're not solutions. You're not going to get the system's legal system to correct the system. That's never going to work. That's a complete fantasy. You're never going to be able to, quote, vote the right people into office. The only people who seek office and stay in office are people who are the wrong kind of people. By definition, they're people who want control and power over other people. That's the kind of people we exactly don't need. And they're the only kind of people who are ever going to be in public office. So all of those kinds of solutions can never work. Trying to escape, run to another state and get people all the time, well, what's a better state? Well, it's true. You might buy yourself a little time, kind of the Braveheart deal. Yeah, you'll live, for a while, and that's it. And that's all it is, because ultimately, unless we can get some people to understand what the system is, this technocratic sort of medical electronic prison that they're creating is just, it's going to swallow up any and all dissenters. And when they have a sufficient amount of AI and robotics and or pharma that they can just inject into all these government goons who run around enforcing it, and in this country run around talking about the Constitution as they're just completely and totally abusing my constitutional rights, and then they just inconsistently say, well, tell it to the judge. It doesn't make any sense until once we get to the point where they don't really need those kinds of people very much, because they can just push Legalman's button and just turn off my account and deny me access to things. Well, then that's it. That's it. They don't need anything else, because it's the old, they came for the bakers, they came for the Jews, they came for the Catholics, whatever. You come for everybody to have us all divided up. And people like you and me, we're such a tiny minority. So the idea that we're going to be able to escape off, that's not going to happen. It will buy you some more time, no doubt. You can buy some more time. I'm really too old to go and bother trying to do that. But those things aren't actual solutions. They're just a temporary bandage. You're still bleeding out. that's the bottom line. You have to get an actual fix. And running from it, I don't know. That's just not my style at this point. If I was 25 years old, I could make a plan. Maybe I would. There's really nowhere to go. But only a set of skills I have, if you can even call them that, as a lawyer, what the hell am I going to do with those? Nothing, right? I mean, they can just shut me off as soon as they require a vaccination to keep my license, right? And that's coming soon. And I don't know if you have a license or not in your profession, but they license everything in the stinking United States. Everything's licensed. And so in order to, quote, keep your license to make a living, I'm going to have to face the choice of, well, am I going to take this vax or not, right? And that's how easy we're just a few micro steps away from that kind of control. And once that kind of control is instituted, then the options and solutions and the ways to fight it are going to be like a step change, phase shift kind of change in the ability to fight them once they can just turn you off and everything's electronic. It's not going to be like it is now. Now is the time people have to make a stand. Now, before that stuff's instituted. And I just don't see a lot of evidence that people are doing that.
It's really tough. I'm running around like with a chicken with his head cut off, like shouting. I'm like, don't you people see it's closing in around us? And I just heard today one of the banks in Mexico now they won't allow walk-ins anymore. You're going to have to set up an online meeting with QR codes, and there's another bank that I heard as well that to do anything with the teller now, you have to give more IDs and to create this biometric to confirm biometrically that it's you. So it's just like it's getting insane. And so there's something interesting. There's a tweet you put out on Christmas Eve that says the following quote: "In over 9 months, I've still never heard one single person in media or government suggest that what's going on is a bioweapons release by the United States itself. The very fact that discussion is off limits tells me there's too much truth there to allow questions on it," end quote. And given my understanding of history and politics, this was actually one of the first things I had in mind, and still keep it in my mind.
Right.
I was the first to do an interview with the bioweapons expert Francis Boyle in January, right? Way back, like at the very beginning, on COVID being a bioweapon. And that interview just exploded, over 300,000 views, and YouTube just quickly, Pentagon funded Google YouTube quickly just took it down. And, most countries in history have run false flag operations. The only thing is that the West, I believe, in modern history has run the highest quantity of false flag operations, let's say. So, what could you explore a bit more? What are your thoughts on, whether COVID is a bioweapon, and this whole great reset thing, with what's going on with the lockdowns, the masks? For me, it's all like you said, we don't need to lock down. The masks are germ ridden. They're just going to get you more sick. Right. And so
it's all silly. Of course, all the restrictions they've dreamed up, they're not even science. That's why they don't allow anybody to get sworn in and actually cross-examined about the supposed science. They just say this stuff, trust science, trust the science. Well, you're not supposed to trust science anyway. That's the opposite of science. Science is supposed to be proved. It's facts-based. It's not about trust. That's idiotic. But when it comes to bioweapons, one of my buddies, I've known the guy basically forever, since I've kind of had a non-magical thinking mind. I met him when I was 12 or 13 years old, and he's an MD, went to Hopkins. He's basically my age. And, we've had a lot of discussions about this, and he's very knowledgeable about these kinds of things. And I think it's very clear that what's going on out there is probably multiple different kinds of bioweapons. And the very fact that every single thing, all you have to do is look at the CDC sort of guidelines or recommendations that they spew out, and they were spewing out just every single day like crazy for months and months and months, with new symptoms and new this and new that, new protocols and new guidance and all this different shit, supposedly all about COVID-19. Okay, so the entire narrative was locked in within literally since day one. The only thing that's been considered as a possibility is COVID-19. This COVID-19 that came from China, blah, 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 the Wuhan this and the China that, all this stupid crap. Well, the very first thing you have to do, if you're just trying to be a reasonable scientist looking at it, is to say, well, we need to keep our minds open as to what's actually going on here. And of course, this this reacts and all these different things it supposedly is and does. Well, everybody who looks into it finds out they've never even isolated the virus. Okay. Forget putting aside the very strange things with regards to virology and what happened in 1918, the kinds of experiments they did that could never reproduce the transmission system. Put all that aside, just use the official narrative we're given about this thing. We have to investigate whether or not these are bioweapons. This looks to me like something that comes out of Fort Detrick. It's not complicated. It's look at the results. I'm always big on results. So many people, they get lost in all these details about, well, the Republicans and the red versus blue and the conservative and liberal and all these are all irrelevant. They don't matter. Those are means to an end. Look at the results. Who has benefited? The government has benefited massively. It'd be, in fact, impossible to find a 12-month period where the government has gotten more benefit out of any circumstance than this one right here. So that alone creates a motive, even if you're just a basic detective. The most important thing you look for is motive. That's what you do. You're investigating a murder. Who has motive? Who has motive? And that's why it's so easy to kill random people. That's why hitmen can get by and live for so long, because if you don't have a way to connect it up, it's very difficult to figure out what's going on. So step one for me is I look at who's benefiting. Well, the people are getting crushed. The government is expanding at incredible rates, and everybody who's sort of a friend of the king is becoming a trillionaire now. Well, okay, so that's suspicious. That means that's something we need to look at. Well, you're not allowed to discuss it. Okay, so now we know we're over the target because the flak's getting heavy. It's all the same exact stuff each time. And the barrier I run into with people on this is what I said I keep coming back to, because it's such a huge impediment in this country, and that is, sure, that's possible, but it could never happen in our country. It's like, okay, your government would never do it. I don't care how many examples I show them of all the different ridiculous government narratives. I give them the Gulf of Tonkin all the time. It's just a made up event. It didn't even happen. They fought the entire Vietnam War. They knew they'd made the event up. Well, if you tried to suggest that back in the 1960s or 70s, of course, you'd have been laughed at and you're a kook, your career would be over, et cetera. Well, it turns out that was true, and the government was lying the whole time. And we have endless other ones, the weapons of mass destruction, the absurd explanation we get for September 11th. Go down the list. People who don't believe, they can't believe that their government, the United States, the citadel of freedom and liberty and all this other crap that's been jammed in their heads, would ever engage in these kinds of false flags. But if you tell them China released it, they're all believing that. They got no problem believing that, but they can't believe it's coming from the United States, even though all of the evidence points to us, us, not somebody else, us. And just the very fact that the coverage itself, the news media coverage, the governmental discussions about the supposed pandemic, they center on our country. If you just expand out your view a little bit and you say, well, let's look at some other countries. Well, they're not suffering at all. They do this death count and case count, cases crap all the time in our country. Well, look at some other places. The people are fine. None of it's consistent. It's if you're just willing to objectively look at the evidence, just objectively look at it, it just becomes very clear that if there was nothing to hide, they wouldn't be trying to hide. The truth doesn't fear investigation. It encourages investigation so that the people's minds can be put at ease. It doesn't shut down your YouTube show. It doesn't close people off. It doesn't silence critics. It doesn't silence people who are simply suggesting questions to investigate. That's not what the truth does. That's what people who are trying to hide things do. And of course, every single piece of the puzzle is there. Every single piece of the puzzle is there. And as soon as I hear some situation where the narrative is set, as soon as the narrative's set, doesn't matter what happens. They set the narrative. Doesn't matter if it's the Vegas shooter, which is absurd narrative. They just set the narrative, then you never go back to it. Doesn't matter if it's Sandy Hook. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's this ridiculous COVID nonsense. They set the narrative, and they've done countless psychological sort of experiments. And then once the people are sort of locked into an experiment and they kind of have a narrative in their mind, well, then they know. And they know that people will not walk back their opinions. And I brought this up months ago when I did a show about the fact it's a psychological operation. People should read Cialdini's work. He was a big marketer, and he still has his stuff out. You can even see it on YouTube. But his stuff indicates that if you get somebody to make a small commitment, a very, very small commitment, they're very, very hesitant to pull back from that commitment. This is what all sales are based on anyway. You get them to start saying yes and making little teeny tiny commitments. Well, that's where the beauty and the magic of social media comes in. See, they flood people with this bullshit narrative about COVID initially, and all the virtue signaling starts about how much they want to save Granny and help people. And anyway, when people are posting like that, they're locking themselves in to this position. And so they don't want to lose face. It's very difficult for them to walk that stuff back, especially with friends and family. But at work, it's even harder. And if you look at the way a thing like LinkedIn has changed. LinkedIn years ago was just a business place, and people didn't post a bunch of stupid bullshit like they do now. But if you look at LinkedIn now, it's all this virtue signaling nonsense, which I suspect is virtually all driven by bots and fakery in order to create it. But the point being that you get these people to take these positions in front of colleagues, not just friends or family. And now it's almost impossible for to walk back. And what the psychology says is the people won't walk it back. They will double down. No matter how much information comes out, they will continue to double down on their position. And if you look around and you see what's happening with this insane pandemic after months and months, no matter what information, new information comes out, the people don't change their minds. And that fits exactly with the pattern. That's why as soon as they lock it in, once you're locked into this idea, it's COVID-19 and blah, 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 the idea that it could be some other thing, or the United States, or it could be a bioweapons, that's all gone. That's off the table. The people aren't willing to discuss it. They never will, because it requires them to walk back their own positions. And I think that's a huge, huge part that's driving this psychology.
Yeah, I totally agree with your assessment. You lay it out really well. And, I'm one of the first for myself, if I'm proven wrong on something, I'm going to admit it. Oh man, I was wrong. Like you're right.
We want the truth.
Yeah.
We want people like you and me. We just want the truth wherever that leads. Wherever that leads. Why would I want to hang on to an opinion that's wrong and makes no sense? That doesn't help me. That doesn't help me.
And the thing about China, it's like, look, I'm an American citizen. I consider myself a patriotic American, but I don't like the Chinese political system. It's authoritarian. But as you said, the evidence kind of shows that, well, no, it wasn't China, and it was my own government. And it's just like, well, that's just kind of like you said. But it seems like that's going on.
How is China's position so massively increased vis-a-vis either their own population or the world in the last 10 months? It hasn't. Look at the U.S. Look at the U.S. government. Look at its position vis-a-vis its own citizens. It's fantastically improved. The lockdown, the control that's been increased in this country and anywhere in Western Europe is just massive. These other countries, well, lots of them, they're hopeless. I mean, a lot of these countries, the people they're hopeless. They're unarmed. They can't do anything against them. A country like China, how is their position even changed? What did they supposedly get out of it? The problems that came from this supposed China virus have nothing to do with the virus. They have everything to do with the government reaction. The virus didn't do any harm. If we had 50 million people dead, then I might look at China. But whether or not anybody's even dying from it, you look at those most recent, that article that guy wrote, but he just took apart that 400,000 dead figure and just showed it as utter and complete crap. And it was a data dump right at the end of the year into the CDC figures that is a complete anomaly and is probably in all likelihood a total fake. And so who has actually benefited? It's always the same. Who benefited? Massive debt, the markets, trillions and trillions and trillions in new debt. Everything points towards, the disgruntled ex-husband as the killer. Everything points to it. We need to keep looking for evidence to tie them to it. And the fact that they won't allow us to even discuss it or try to investigate any evidence is just more damning. It's just more damning.
And you mentioned the economy, which was my next question. To me, it seems like the economy is completely finished, and not just in the U.S. I mean, I'm hearing every week
they killed it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing like headlines. Record number of Americans pushed into poverty, record inequality, record this, record that. And, we're seeing, I think today we're just seeing now that the stock market was threatening to suspend trading because of social media rumors, and some online brokerages are threatening to suspend some operations. And it seems like that the system's about to collapse. I kind of feel like the dam is about to burst, and a lot of us for years and years have been saying the system's going to crash, and it seems like 2021 might be the year. And what's your thought on the economy?
The economy is really difficult, in my opinion, to make an assessment of, because, as you know, it's totally and completely artificial, all the way to the bottom at this point. It's completely fake and manipulated. I had this conversation with my friends all the time. You look at these companies and you say, what are they doing? What is this supposed money? I don't believe for one second that these ads that they run on Facebook and all this other crap, how many people are clicking and buying this crap? It's the entire economy is the Fed pump now. And of course, the Bank of International Settlements runs everything. And of course, if there was anything fundamentally true about the way the economy supposedly worked at this point, if you do like Austrian sort of economics, if you look at something like that and you look at the analysis, it's a total impossibility. How can we have endless trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in debt accumulating in obviously a bankrupt, absurd country like I have here in the United States, and then yet we have 0% interest rates? That's not possible under any actual analysis. The interest rates should be skyrocketing. Gold and silver should be skyrocketing. But everything is a controlled, manipulated thing. And so when you have a controlled, manipulated thing that clearly doesn't actually follow any rules, there are obviously no rules. The question becomes, is there a, quote, breaking point where they can no longer hold the fraud together? That's really the issue. And I think it's a very difficult issue to determine, because what would it take now to actually, quote, break the economy? What would that mean? Because the people are convinced you can just give money out. The government has money. Where does it get these trillions of dollars? They don't exist. It's just made up. And so how long can it continue to be faked, since the entire thing is fake? Facebook, how many billions of accounts did they find that were fake accounts? Remember that? It was like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. They found all these supposed fake accounts and they wiped them out. It was like more than 1 billion accounts. Was there a class action lawsuit for all the overcharging for the advertising and marketing? No. That alone told me that all of this stuff is totally fake. I suspect it's just a gigantic behind the scenes wheel where they take the Fed pump and they roll it into these fake Fed companies, these fake tech companies, like the FANGs are, which are all just basically intelligence organizations that are operating as pretend private businesses. And they take the Fed pump and then they use that money to buy supposed ads, which then uses it to buy supposed services. And they just run that thing round and round and round. And there's nothing real there. And if you were able to audit any of it, you'd see that it was all fake. And so each one of those things always brings me back to the same question. What would it mean to break the economy? It doesn't fit these old molds I grew up with in the 70s and 80s, studying these books about how, if you get out of whack here and the fundamentals and do this, you do that, you got to have debt to equity and all. Those are all out the window now. Anybody can see they're out the window and have been in earnest since 2008, when we had a crash, so-called, and then a recovery. But everybody knows there was no real recovery. All that property that was so overpriced and all that just went away. It went away. They have an ability to make this fake stuff just kind of go away. And Bitcoin, any of these cryptocurrencies are the same thing. Put aside the fact that they're just intelligence operations in order to get people into digital currencies to close the door. Just put that aside. It doesn't mean you can't make money in them. Of course you can. But there's no basis for crypto to be skyrocketing and gold and silver not to be. There's no basis for that except for massive manipulation and control. And when they have control this extensive, How do you make a prediction about where it can go, since they can literally make it go anywhere? We are currently the Wile E. Coyote of economies. We are out over the cliff. We haven't looked down yet, but nothing's holding us up except for the illusion and the fantasy that they continue to run. So it pops when they want it to pop. And I completely convinced not 1 second before. Just not 1 second before, because I can't honestly think of an event that could occur that would create what people call a crash that is not something they can control. And I've asked people in the past, what is this kind of event? What is it? What could happen? I never hear an answer that for me makes any sense. Have you given that any thought? Do you have maybe any ideas about what could happen?
Yeah. I got. I don't know. Like they always talk about black swan. I mean, it could be anything. It's hard.
But what would it be? Yeah, so I'm saying, see, people have a theoretical idea. There's this construct that something could happen, but when I start looking at things like, okay, well, what could it actually be? I mean, outside of the super volcano going off or something where everyone just stops. I'm talking about a business event, sometime a cataclysmic event.
Bank default, possibly,
How's a bank going to default that they can't control? How's that going to happen when everything's digital? Yeah. How can that happen if they don't want it to happen, right? Because we have no idea. There's no way to audit the system when it's fully digital like this. It's totally impossible. We have no idea what's in other people's accounts and what's real money, fake money. The Bank of International Settlements just sends a little note down the line, and now you've got authentic, quote, money in the system. No one even knows what's in the system. So if something happens, I don't see how it's not something they want to happen, that this is when they will, quote, bring it down or create a crisis to then normalize and crisis and normalize again and again. I don't know. I used to believe in the concept that, you can only have so much debt on these things, and eventually it reaches the breaking point, and all this other stuff then has to happen. And but now it's decades and decades past the point where it should have happened, and it never happens. And how can there be 0%, hell, negative interest rates in Europe and all sorts of trillions of dollars in negative interest rates? How can a negative interest rate exist and the market and this system be real? I don't understand that. Maybe you can answer that for me.
I totally agree with you, even on the cryptos and so many things. I feel like I'm talking to my older self here. But so we've talked about, the economy, the political corruption, and COVID. What do you envision the next 4 years of the Biden administration, assuming that, he's not replaced by Kamala Harris or the Civil War starts or whatever, an asteroid hits? I don't know what's going to happen, but I mean, is it going to be a continuation of what we've had so far, kind of like a slow burn into more poverty and war and dictatorship, or you feel there's going to be like an acceleration somehow under the towards more bad things under Biden?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, I wonder. I always go back to the same kind of concept that, look, if it's working, right, they're not going to take any big chances. If it's working, they're not going to take any chances, and it's currently working. And does that mean that they might not try to speed it up a little? They might. They have the data when it comes to monitoring every single kind of. They take this interview and they run it through their stinking confabulator 5000, and they calculate up how many people listen and tweets and emails, and they read it all, and they kind of judge where the people are, and they kind of know where it is. That's one of the main reasons I think they've had this event rollout like they did, because so many people talk about, well, if it was a bioweapon, they'd have killed millions and hundreds of millions of people. It's like, why? Well, maybe the purpose of it was to see the reactions to this kind of thing and just to collect a huge ass amount of data. Because I can only imagine how much data they have now with regards to what does it take in order to kind of move the population and keep them on board. How far can they really push it on each one of these areas? And so when I look at Biden, I say, look, the guy's obviously just a joke, a puppet. If it's even him, I mean, obviously there's at least two of them with the earlobe thing. Anybody can look at that. Maybe he's already gone. Maybe he's in a bariatric chamber someplace just being held up. I mean, no one knows the truth about any of this. Maybe Kamala's already calling the shots. Maybe someone else is. But it ultimately doesn't matter. What we're talking about is the narrative that people are fed, which is that Joe Biden is president. what I look around and see is zero real resistance outside of the governors in the red states are now going to have to pull back a little. They're not going to be able to go along like they did with Trump. And you're already seeing some of that where in red states, they're not going to be as okay, but the Fed government can continue to push really hard. And I think that they're going to keep the grind down on. They're just going to keep the grind down on. Me as a white guy, I'm screwed. I'm totally screwed. White guys are just going to be an absolute, we're not welcome anywhere at this point. So they're going to divide people up massively, going to continue to grow the government massively. Government restrictions and controls will continue to come in. And will the economy boom? I don't think the economy is going to boom again. I guess it depends on how you define the economy. The jobs are gone. I mean, the vast majority of so many jobs are gone. The vast majority of people just completely dependent on government contracts, some kind of government interaction in some form or fashion or government oversight. And so if you look at that, trying to imagine how could things actually significantly improve for sort of an independent person like me, they're not going to improve. If the only way forward is public-private partnership businesses. I've been working with a buddy of mine trying to get those together because that's the only thing that's going to be around in any kind of size is these public-private partnership businesses or data collection systems that work under the pretense that they're private, most of which probably get financed by Incutel and other CIA resources early on, and they're probably got assets all over the place and like the line in Mission Impossible, yeah, go ahead and boot it up. I'd pack first because there's going to be a bunch of Virginia farm boys jumping around here. And that's the reality. Every one of these things, government involved in everything. If you can get a business together that uses either government funding, government financing, some kind of helps government, you can sell to government. Those things have a chance. I think the days of independent, small entrepreneur kind of things, those days they're cooked. They're just cooked. Anybody can look around and see they're cooked. They're trying to destroy all independent professionals. They want to wipe them out. They want to drive them all into these large controllable organizations. It's the same with all the retail. They've already wiped out all that. They want to drive into all these big businesses where they're all controlled. And so to the extent that you can thrive inside that kind of system, that's great. To the extent people try to use the old model, the sort of pre-COVID, pre-2008 model where you were independent, I just think that's probably a fantasy moving forward. I don't see any way it can happen with the circumstances we have and that we're going to have moving forward. I just don't see a way to do it.
Yeah, and you said you'll as a white guy you'll have trouble. I have a solution for you. Become a Mexican. I became a Mexican.
There you go.
I'm waiting for the moment. Whenever I'm back in the U.S. and I'm a Caucasian or whatever, a Slav, European. I'm a white guy, I guess you can say. And if any social justice warrior wants to give me some trouble, I'm like, what do you? I'll start responding in Spanish, and I'll be like, I pull out my Mexican passport. Like I'm not joking. Like seriously, I'm Mexican. What are you? What are you doing? It's like, that's that. So they can't get me. Technically, they can. According to the social justice warriors,
right?
I'm Mexican.
There you
I'm
go.
a minority. You can't touch me. So
maybe I should start being transgender. I'd probably get a better chance at that. It'd be a little tougher on the other side. I could claim to be. I'll have to look through their list of possible genders and see if I find one I like.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. There's like over 50 now. So I guess. My last question then would be, I frequently ask my guests this, this week Biden decided to continue the trend of sending B-52 bombers to circle like vultures around Iran. It seems to me Pentagon, I spoke with Francis Boyle about a month ago, again, on this topic about war with Iran. And, it's been planned. They want to do it. They just don't get around to do it and doing it. And you think Pax Americana is going to go out with a bang? You think we're just going to continue with this foreplay, or do you think they're going to, start dropping bombs?
I really wonder, everything is a double and triple head fake, especially in that foreign policy, but they need boogeymen. And obviously there's something going on with this Iran thing. Will they start dropping bombs? if they start dropping bombs, they will definitely not be the first ones to drop them. They will have some made up bullshit, pretense, false flag nonsense that Iran started and we have to defend. And that's, if it's going to start, it'll start like that. Do I think it'll expand out into some huge war? I just don't think it will. It could, but when's the last time we really had wars like that? All these wars are just this sort of amorphous blob of supposed freedom fighting against an Islamo, Nazi, fascist, whatever they are, some kind of problem they have over there. They're always the same, and we drop bombs on them. Maybe we send some troops over in some certain areas, but are we going to go into some kind of war with them outright? I seriously doubt that. It doesn't serve the purpose. I always go back to the same things. What's the purpose, right? What's the purpose of any of these ridiculous made up wars and actions? What is any of it, right? It's always some crap behind the scenes that has to do with accessing resources or twisting arms to get some other thing. It has nothing to do with freedom fighting. And so what do we want from them? Is there something we really want from them? Probably not really, that we're not already getting. And so all we really want from them is the ability to distract people, show that we're America, supposedly call for us to come together, get the freedom fighting fools from our country onto kind of the side of Biden and, show of force and all this crap. I think it's mostly decoration and pageant making and very little to do with like actual killing. Obviously, people in our government don't care about dropping bombs on innocent citizens all over the world, killing whoever they need to keep their little game going. But I would go back to motives, and that is, what can they get from an actual war that they can't get from the kind of fake war they run now, where they just burn up a bunch of munitions and bombs, which makes the military-industrial complex happy, burn gasoline all over the thing, flying planes and boats and feeding all these people. And they blow up a few things here and there. But isn't that really the result? They get headlines. They want headlines, and they want some of this military stuff, and they test some weapons. Do you really need a full-blown war that has potential to have some real backlash against you and actually have a bunch of people coming back in flag-draped coffins to do that? Probably not. Well, if you can do it without having that as a possible downside, then they're going to do it. If they can only do it by having that as a downside, well, then they're going to do it if they want it enough. And that's why, to me, it's always about motives, trying to figure out what might they get from it, as opposed to the fantasies about what they tell people in the newspaper articles about what the war is about. And so people like you and me have to sit around and kind of, hash out, well, what would they be getting? What are they really going for here? And is that really necessary to commit to a huge full-scale war? And I just doubt there is anything, because I don't think there's anybody. I don't think there's enough resistance, honestly, to this sort of BIS world system they have, that Iran has something they want that isn't already being served by the fact that they need a boogeyman. So why get rid of the boogeyman? You want to fight the boogeyman. You don't want to destroy the boogeyman. You want to fight him. And that's what they're doing, in my opinion.
So, well, at least, that's an optimistic note you leave us on, no World War
there you
III.
Go.
So,
there you go.
That's something good. Any final thought for us today, then?
Oh, probably not. I would just, beyond the fact that I would just say that as long as the people, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And I would always suggest that people not spend too much time analyzing super details, and always try to at least pull back a little bit further and look at the big picture, like I said, with kind of motives and things like that, because the answers lie there vast majority of the time, as opposed to the details of what you can gather from the supposed event. Step back and look at motives.
All right. I'll post the links to your Twitter, your Quash podcast, and Patreon. Is there any other website or project we should know about?
No, I'm trying to get one together, but they can just hit me at Twitter kind of thing, and go and check out my podcast if they want to hear me. I've got a ton of them out there. And then if they're interested, they can always float over to my Patreon. I've got a bunch of additional stuff in there, but they can find me.
All right. Legalman, I suggest everyone check out the Quash podcast. It's literally a bit of a punch in the face and breath of fresh air. I love it because it's no nonsense analysis. And I think speaking to you for the first time, I think we think a lot in many ways. And so thanks for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It was a great time.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast and interview. I would like to remind you that our website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list that goes out each weekend with the latest podcast and a long collection of important news headlines. It's good to sign up for the newsletter in case we experience censorship and deplatforming. You can help the Geopolitics and Empire podcast by subscribing to and interacting with all of our channels such as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Gab, Minds, and Steemit. You can also help us by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms such as iTunes, Castbox, Stitcher, Spreaker, and so on. Finally, if you value our work and our mission and would like to see us continue interviewing experts from across the political spectrum, please consider leaving a one-time donation via PayPal or Bitcoin or becoming a regular monthly supporter on our Patreon. All the links can be found on geopoliticsandempire.com. Thanks for listening.